Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome to the show Van Ethan Levy. Van is a queer, non-binary, socialized as female, autistic, trans person dedicated to social justice. They are duly licensed as a marriage and family therapist and a professional clinical counselor. Van is passionate about holding space for all intersections of one's identities and aims to use a trauma-informed lens to help folks learn ways to help support themselves in the best way possible. Van is the author of the interactive book Exploring My Identities and produced a documentary called Do Something, Trans and Non-Binary Identities. Everybody, welcome to the show, Van Levy. I don't know
Thank you
why
so much.
it's a struggle for me to say that right, but welcome to the show, Van.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's okay. I often tell people it's like leave me, like Levy.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
My brain, I made sure to ask you to make sure I got it right, and my brain just keeps wanting to hit the Y with a hard I. It's starting with your story, Van. I love to open with this one. It's my favorite question. How did you choose your name?
so my first name, I actually didn't really get a choice in it. It was kind of like my parents communicated what would be easiest for them. So I'm actually not a big fan of it, but because it's been used for so long in my life. But the name Ethan, I just really, really liked it. So that's my middle name, which is why most often I ask for people to, if they're going to write it out, that it's Van Ethan Levy, just because um, I don't like just saying the two parts that are so tied to what was kind of given, almost forced, versus like what is my own to own. But if somebody were to call me Ethan, I don't think I would respond. I would be like, is there somebody here named Ethan anywhere? They're calling you.
So, getting into the story itself, when did you first realize that you were non-binary? And actually, let me ask you this question before we get into that. I usually say, when did you first realize you were trans? Do you identify yourself as being part of the greater trans umbrella, or does non-binary require some different sensitivities there?
So my identity is both trans and non-binary, and every identity, trans and or non-binary and or another non-cis identity, is so unique to the individual. So for me, my trans identity comes with that the world assigned me as female, that I have had surgeries, that I've had, that I take hormones. That doesn't mean that because other people do that, that automatically defaults them to being trans, right? Like there's cis people who have surgery who take hormones, but that's my connection to my trans identity in terms of experiencing the world being read as in different ways. And my non-binary identity for me is being who I am and not having to be tied to the societal constructs. At the end of the day, I think all of us are non-binary, and what I mean by that is that there really is no such thing as masculinity and there is no such thing as femininity. It's all dictated by the society we live in, right? Like a skirt here is known as women's clothing, but you go to Scotland and that's men's clothing. So I think your question was, I actually lost your question. I apologize. Could you ask me again?
Well, yeah. The problem is I threw a second one in there on you. So, the one to get to now is, when did you first realize you were trans and non-binary? When did that realization first hit for you?
So there's a lot of different layers to that question. So I've known since I was maybe a baby that who the world was addressing me as was not the fit for me. My parents told me that even as a baby, I would literally rip the bows out of my hair, including ripping my own hair out just to get them off of me. And there's not a lot of understanding at that age. It's just I don't like this. This is not for me. Whether it was about having something in my hair or if it was about that they were actually bows. Um, as I grew older, I always wondered like, when is my penis coming? Communicating that like I'm not a woman or I'm not a girl, um, and that was again at very young ages. I didn't have language to knowing that there was anything other than what we're assigned at birth until I was maybe 13 years old. I think it was like a Cosmo Girl where it was about this person's journey. Who I think it was like from Lacey to Lace or something like that, where I realized that people can be born um, who they are and the world just not reading them for who they are. And so that's when I started to have some language for it. But even with that language, I was still institutionalized and labeled as crazy, as mentally ill for being who I am. It wasn't until I was maybe 29, when almost 30, when I learned what it meant for others to be non-binary and how that felt more aligned with who I was. So I've always been non-binary. I just never had the language or awareness or education or exposure to really fully understand who I
Hmm. So it sounds like, for the next question, what cracked your egg? You wouldn't have a particular cracked egg moment, but what was the catalyst for coming out and identifying as that fully and embracing that?
So I feel like I've always been out just without the language.
Okay.
Like I've always said, I'm not a girl, or at the time, the only thing that I knew that if you're not a girl, then you're a boy. So it was always like I'm a boy from the moments that I could start verbalizing. I don't feel like there was really ever a point where I had to come out to my family because I've been screaming this since I was a child. It was like a constant out. Okay, well, I didn't know about being trans, but I learned what it meant to be bisexual. Then I learned what it meant to be lesbian, right? So there was those different points of like, well, I like women, so maybe I'm lesbian. Well, I also like other people, so now I'm bisexual. And not that like my sexuality changed, it's the access to language to understanding of who I was. And it was the same thing with being trans, being non-binary.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like there was another part of your question that I wanted to answer, but I lost it again.
Just basically, kind of how you in getting to there, how did you learn to accept that and bring it out publicly in a stronger way? But you kind of have said that you were already exhibiting as much of that as you possibly could.
Yeah, I've been fighting it since I would even say preschool, maybe first grade, second grade. Of like, no, I'm not going there just because the girls are there, or I deserve to play football. It doesn't like in middle school, like fighting the coaches, and they try to defend it of like, oh, we don't have protection for your breasts, and it's like, well, I don't care like if they get hurt or damaged. So I feel like constantly having to advocate and never winning, right? Like always being penalized, kicked out, expelled, whatever it might be, put into. We didn't have detention, but we had the equivalent. I don't remember what they called it. Constantly being placed, even to like again to the point of being institutionalized. From I think I was 12 until about 17 years old. Did I spend the entirety of my adolescence institutionalized for being trans and not placating to what was told who I am. So it was like there wasn't anything that broke my egg. I came out a broken egg. And I wasn't yoking around.
Love a great pun. So looking back, from the perspective of the training that you've had as a therapist, do you think that there was anything in particular that gave you the strength to push back so hard against the institution instead of succumbing and repressing it?
So actually it's kind of the reverse in the way that because I've been held back in so many ways, I've been kicked out of easily 30 different schools. I've been kicked out of colleges, grad school programs, internships constantly, all around being trans, non-binary, and autistic, and just the different levels of transphobia and ableism. I was tired of it, and it's not okay. Not that it just happened to me, but I'm an outspoken person who knows a lot of the time my legal rights or will fight until I figure what they are. I can't imagine what it's like for people who have no idea. And so I don't want that happening to people. I can't stop it, but my goal is to create more accessible ways because I can't change the system. But what I can do is I can make ways for other people in our community to get to where they want to go without having to fight in the same ways that I did, or at least that's my intention and my goal. So I feel like going to grad school really showed me. I mean, this path of becoming a therapist really showed me all the different deficits that exist in the therapy community. So I graduated high school at 17, and I basically didn't finish college, I think, until 26, and I didn't take any time off. It's a matter of being kicked out of so many schools. Sorry, yeah, was it 24, 26 years old? And it wasn't like I had mostly straight A's. I was a 4.0 student. It wasn't about academics. It was about getting so much pushback about being who I am. So I got to see all the different areas as to where they're creating more harm. And it still exists. I'm enrolling in a community college class to help me with some marketing so I can learn how to do that for my conference. And the problematic questions that they're asking are just horrific.
Hmm.
And we're now 2022.
I know now you're in the Southern California area. Is that where all of those school problems you had were, or were you in a different part of the country?
Kind of all over. So Massachusetts, Utah, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, different San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, Orange County. Um, I'm sure elsewhere. That's all that's just kind of coming to mind in this moment.
Wow. So you bounced around trying to get an education, and it took a while for you to find that spot, huh?
In education, just to exist, to not experience violence, whether that's like emotional, physical, sexual, like just literally to exist as a human being in this world.
You mentioned with family and sort of alluded to in other areas, there wasn't much of a coming out. Were there any areas where you did kind of have to come out, or was sort of what was happening over and over again at in those various colleges whenever you were brought into a new environment? Did you have to explain your identity and tell them, like I said, essentially come out again?
So I feel like it's less of an explanation versus like, don't call me that name, don't use those pronouns. And
Mm,
right, there was this constant like fight back. And I think because it seemed like I had so much confidence around it that they oftentimes either they thought that they were misunderstanding or that there was just direct pushback and that they weren't going to do it. But it's not like a I'm trans, this is what it means, this is what you need to do. It's like, don't call me that name. That's not my name. This is my name. Um, don't use those pronouns. Uh, so there was just a lot of fighting. But in a way, it's like inadvertently coming out. But there wasn't me taking the time to explain it to them because I felt like I didn't owe them anything. They don't explain to me who they are. They
mm.
don't explain to me about their identity. So why am I having to sit here and handhold you through something that's extremely traumatic for me?
I love that perspective. It's not our responsibility. I do love that. Um, so then what was your experience at first in trying to find community? Did you seek out others like you, trying to find other people that you could speak to and a group that you could belong to?
It was a lot harder. So I think when I was about 13, I had shared with a family member that that I was trans, and the message that was communicated back to me, and this is somebody who is not trans but is not heterosexual, and I don't want to share more than that because I really don't want to like call them out too much. But they basically communicated to you that gay people are finally getting their rights, and now trans people are coming in and screwing it all up because we're freaks. So that kind of deterred me from wanting to connect with others. As I started to slowly get older and out of the conversion camps, I ended up meeting a really close friend that I'm still friends with to this day, who kind of took me in. She's again a cis woman who's a I'm not sure if she's queer or lesbian, but just really showed me a different side of the community. And then so I kind of felt more comfortable with the lesbian queer community. And again, not again at large, and we can't generalize at all. People are a certain way. It was much harder in the trans community. I had moved to Olympia, Washington, so that I could get my name changed and start hormones. And the trans guy that I had met up there, first of all, denied being trans and just was really harmful. And there's embodied so much toxic masculinity. So again, that really scared me. And like basically said, don't tell people you're trans. Don't ask me questions about being trans. Like just be a man and figure it out. So
Wow.
a lot of those experiences really deterred me from the community. Of course, there were like there was one person I met when I was 15. Again, still friends with. He's older now. I think in his like later 60s. Um, who really took trans men under his wing almost, and just helped them navigate the systems and talked with their families. But to me, that was like because he's an older person, then that means that that's why he is so safe. But I don't think that there can be other people who are safe who are younger, which is obviously not true.
Mhm.
That's just kind of when my 15-year-old brain or my 18-year-old brain, what all I'm experiencing is all this harm from others. Now I don't I'm starting to build a bit of a community. I had some, and then COVID happened and things are shifting a lot. But it can be really hard because a lot of the time, especially in the trans community that I've consistently found, especially the binary trans community, there's so much lack of understanding of non-binary folks, so much toxic masculinity or like binary thinking of you have to be this way or else you're this or you're that. And then we also have to add the layers of people being white, people being neurotypical, people being able-bodied. And so it becomes more and more complex that the next thing you know, you're engaging with a cis trans person who is basically a white supremacist without knowing how much white supremacy that they're uplifting based on what they're regurgitating because that's what they've embodied in order to be seen as a man, right?
Hmm.
Like misogyny, homophobia, all the different things.
Yeah. Yeah, or just that we absorb just from being in the society, and you learn, you just, it's via osmosis that to be safe and to be accepted in society, you have to fulfill these roles and follow these rules.
Yeah,
Um,
and with that, we have to think who is educating trans people about our own bodies and our own lives? Cisgendered people are. So they're living their cis het normal, right, safe life where they're not experiencing the same level of that we are. They're not experiencing what we're experiencing, and they're educating us on how to live that normal, safe life without ever recognizing the harm and damage that it's actually causing us. It's limiting us from being able to be who we are while we're trying to fit these molds that are not us.
mhm. So I'm curious, what was your relationship with therapy growing up? Were you able to find anything that was actually helpful to you, or was it all that harmful conversion type treatment?
It's really hard to say because when I reflect back on the places that I felt safer in, um, I can now, with a different understanding of what's actually supportive and affirming, it was actually really harmful. It's like there was this place that I lived for well over maybe 7 months or so that didn't make me use a different name. However, still kept me on the girl side and everything. But they were focused more on helping me learn coping skills to regulate. But at the same time, they weren't supportive in terms of using my pronouns, like allowing me to exist as I am. And then also treating me as being trans as part of a mental illness. So I can't recall really any therapy or therapist that truly were affirming in the way that is actually affirming for the times, right? Like if we look at the culture, they would have been the most affirming that was accessible, but that doesn't mean that it was actually affirming.
Hmm.
Even now, it's incredibly difficult to find affirming therapists out there. There's so you go to psychology.com and you click trans affirming therapists, you'll get thousands of therapists. But when you actually when because I engage with thousands and thousands, I provide education on trans affirming care, and most of the people who mark that they're trans affirming are extremely problematic. So an example is here in San Diego, there was a group called Trans and Non-Binary Affirming Therapist Network Group or something like that that was run by cis people that literally kicked me out for calling them out on their transphobic language. Um, so these trans organizations, even like WPATH, is typically binary trans, mostly cis run. The people dictating our care in our bodies are all cis people.
Hmm. Well, and there's just so many problems in our society. Like I said, we talked in the pre-interview, the terms that are problematic that I still use and identify with, and the things that like you said, we're just regurgitating that were so deeply ingrained, and you get to this point of wanting to help other trans folks and be open and all of that and have the right mindset, and yet you can still use harmful language unintentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you want that to open up for me to share a couple of the terms.
Yeah, that would be great, and just kind of like your perspective on it, on kind of where we are currently in society and where we need to go with our language.
So there's three terms that come to mind, and I actually have readily available the links, and I can put them in the chat because I think it would go out to everybody, right? Or does it just go to you?
Oh, the chat in OBS Ninja?
Yeah. Is that just
No,
for
but that's
you?
the perfect thing because you wouldn't be able to post a link in the Twitch chat anyways.
Oh,
It's pretty locked down. So
okay.
yeah, go ahead and put it in there, and I'll bring it over to here.
Okay, so I'm going to send you over to. So these are two different articles that I wrote because sometimes when I share stuff, it's not everybody can retain everything, and not just when I share stuff, like just in general.
Hmm.
So the three terms that I want to talk about are first, so often do we ourselves or other people use the term transition when communicating about us just existing and affirming ourselves. So what's really problematic about the term transition, so if we think about what it means going from one state to another. So if I'm living and then I'm dead, I transition from a living state to a dead state versus I'm not transitioning from being a woman to non-binary, or I didn't transition from being a woman to a man to non-binary. I have always been non-binary. It's the world that has not read me for who I am. Nothing about me changed. Maybe the way that the world read me, but if we look at a cis person who might get a nose job and breast implants, right? They didn't transition. They just engaged in surgeries that was affirming to themselves.
Hmm.
The couple other terms is identify as. So many times, what do you identify as, right? Like that's so problematic because it's like, what do I want to choose today? Oh, I choose this versus like my identity is. My identity is trans. My identity is non-binary. My identity is queer. These are things that I don't get to change. This is who I am. It might change over time as we learn more about ourselves, but it's not because we're picking and choosing. We're exploring who we are. Things shift and we find language that's more affirming to ourselves. But it's not like a choice; it's just an exploration. Um, and then finally, the last term is the term transgender. Right? If somebody tells me they're transgender and that's their identity, I 100% respect that. I'm not saying that people can't hold that identity, but it's also similar to transition, right? Like it's communicating that you're going from one gender to another when again we've always been who we are. It's the world that is not reading us for who we are, and in that reading of how the world reads us, right? Like if somebody looks at me and says, oh, you're male because you have a beard, because you have deep voice, because you have hair on your body, right? That's a transphobic understanding of me, right? Because you're basing that men have beards and men have deep voices and men have body hair. But there are many cis women who have beards, who have deep voices, who have body hair, right? So there's not one way to be a man or a woman or non-binary. It's how the society has constructed what male female means, and then we're just aligning what society has dictated to us. And if we look at who's come up with these, it's going to be cisgender, white, able-bodied, heterosexual, neurotypical, often males. So by default, every time that we're reading somebody based on what we think of who they are versus what they've shared with us, we're uplifting these problematic understandings. So that's why I use the term trans versus transgender. I'm not going from one gender to another. I've always been who I am. It's the world that hasn't read me for who I'm not. I also hold that, let's say that you shared with me that your identity is transgender. I will always respect that and not tell you that you're wrong.
That's a really beautiful explanation, and I really appreciate you giving me those links to put in there. Like I love that depth of perception on that. And it's funny because it comes down to, it can come down to a difference in reading the term itself. Like I identify it as, trans, just being across gender, not necessarily cross gender. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to hear that. And I love the affirmation that trans is a more accepted and a more accepting term for all of those that fall under the umbrella. I also, I was looking for video to promote the show tonight, and I came across a webinar you had done, and I noticed in the trans umbrella that you showed, all of the identities that fall under that. Um, uh, there was a different way of looking at it um, than just specifically identities, and it was more about the various genders and gender. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't have another term for identity, but
Identities.
mhm. But it was just I'm losing the clarity on the differentiation now that I don't have the two lists in front of me. But maybe that's something that I'll circle back around with you personally and just kind of talk about those two things and get a clearer perspective on where you come from on those different terms. Um,
Well,
okay.
I think we're talking about the same thing. So it's this like umbrella that I made with different like trans kind of flags on, like just a few colors on it, and then just a ton of lists of different identities, whether it was like gender fuck, fluid, trans, non-binary, right? Like all these different lists.
Hmm.
And I show that to show people that there are so many different identities out there. Like not all of them are even listed on there. And I think there's like 50 on there. Like that's just a small fraction of how many are on there, to show people that just because you haven't heard of it or unaware of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I also intentionally don't go through each and share what they need, because all of our identities are unique to ourselves. So if we think about it, if we ask 100 cis women, what does it mean to be a woman? You're going to get 100 different answers because our identities are unique to ourselves. So how is our community going to be any different? Are we supposed to be a monolith and a copy paste that every trans woman, non-binary person, and trans man have to have the exact same definition as to what their identity means to them? Is that the what you were referring to?
Yeah, no, and that's perfect. And thank you for clarifying that. Um, so you brought up the problem with the term transition, and I've been liking to ask the question of like, what does transition look like for you? Um, so I'm gonna change that and hopefully find a way to apply it to you. Um, what is the key focus of your journey from being being brought up as in a female context to finding your own identity and owning that? What has that journey been like for you? What are what's the core of that?
Again, all I can think of is fight. That's all it's been. It's
Hmm.
been a nonstop fight. It's exhausting, and it's been a fight, and it's oftentimes been a fight that I don't even get the space to explore what is it that I want. So when I was 18, the Benjamin standard of care is what was utilized, so that in order for you to have surgery, you needed to live as the opposite gender for a year, be in therapy for a year, and be on hormones for a year. I never wanted to be on therapy. Well, I didn't want therapy, but I mean, I never wanted to be on hormones. So I felt forced into taking something that I didn't want in order to gain access to what I wanted, which was chest surgery. I
Wow.
also then had some medical stuff that came up, which then led to having a hysterectomy. Which with a hysterectomy, you have to be on some type of hormones. And so at the time, with my internalized transphobia that we all have, I knew that I didn't want to be on estrogen because I didn't want to be read as female. And my only other option that I thought was being read as male. So I feel like there's so much exhaustive fight to be who I am when all I want is to just be who I am and be read for who I am. So I have a lot of dysphoria. There are times where I really love having a beard and having facial hair and having body hair. And then there's times when I look in the mirror and all I see is somebody who is read as male looking back at me, meaning I don't get to be seen for who I really am. And I hate that and wish that I could just, because shaving doesn't take it off. Like I shaved my neck today right before, and you could still see the 5 o'clock shadow or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So shaving or not shaving, it's still going to be apparent that there was a beard there. And again, our world views that beard there must mean that I'm male. And so that's why often I wish like I didn't start hormones, because then there wouldn't be that reading one way or another. But then again, that's my own internalized transphobia, that I need to look a certain way in order to be read as non-binary. And at the end of the day, with or without a beard, I'm not going to be read as non-binary, because our world is so binary that they're only going to see male or female or what the fuck are you, but they're not going to see anything outside of that.
That's such an important point to bring up about our non-binary siblings and this that struggle that they go through. We talk a lot as binary trans folks of dysphoria and issues with waking up and seeing the wrong thing in the mirror and just kind of feeling that incongruity. But when there is no identity, there is no outward appearance that is that is read as non-binary. It just becomes incredibly problematic, because how as a non-binary person do you ever look in the mirror and see yourself and see the right thing looking back, other than to just eschew it all entirely, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard because when I want to wear makeup or if I want to wear a dress or a skirt and I look in the mirror, all I see and all I feel is terror of who is going to kill me because of this. When I paint my nails, I think, who is going to kill me because of this? And it's terrifying to exist in a world that just being, wearing, existing as something that's affirming to you could ultimately lead to your name being on that list of our trans siblings who are violently taken from us every single day. That list that we have that the HRC has is only the reported ones, and there are many states that they legally they've made laws where they can't, that it's not considered a hate crime.
Hmm.
So, and if we look at the world at large, it's like I think it's like multiple trans people are murdered every single day, and again, literally just for existing. And so
Yeah.
I know that that's kind of detracts from what you were asking, that there's nothing that, you know, we can wear or do to look in the mirror and see, oh yeah, I look really non-binary today. Because for me, there's not even that space, because that space is taken up by pure panic and fear and self-hatred that I immediately wipe it off, rip it off, take the nail polish off, whatever it might be, unless I know that I'm going to have somebody with me the entirety of the time that I know that nobody's going to mess with. But even with that, that terror in my heart of what if I've now endangered the life of somebody I love?
Yeah, I understand that completely. I had a very similar fear in one of the first times I went in and met with some trans folks in real life. I just had it in my head. My vision, my perception of them is that they pass as cis folks, and so my fear was, am I going to be the one that gets the rest of the group clocked and then puts us all in danger? So yeah, that's a very common thing, and it's just so disheartening to hear so much of your story where where you were kind of forced by circumstances into having having the beard, having a very masculine presentation, so that now those times when you have that space and that need to express either a more feminine look or a feminine identity, or just what is stereotypically in society deemed feminine, you're blocked from that because of that lack of safety. It's really disheartening, and I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry for you, and I'm sorry for everybody else who has to experience that. Like we have this fear and this terror, and we live in a country that is a hell of a lot more accepting than a lot of other places where there isn't even the option to even have a show like this. And so it's really overwhelming when we think about our lives, the people we know, the people in our cities, in our states, in our countries, and then looking even beyond that. So I feel extremely limited, and I am beyond fortunate to have the ability to do a lot more than many others. And it doesn't make it, oh, you should just be grateful and happy for what you get. It's like, no, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight and continue pushing more so that maybe I don't think my family's kids, like my siblings' kids, will experience the world I'm trying to create. But I think if maybe three or four or more generations, that
Mhm.
maybe. But whether or not they do, it's not going to stop me from fighting, because maybe there's one trans or non-binary person or two-spirited person or somebody who is not cis that I can create a little bit of a safer space that they didn't have elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if we can create it just for the time that we're, like on this show, where we're live here, or giving a talk, or that kind of thing, even if we can provide it just in that limited space, I think it does help. One of my questions is typically, how have your goals shifted along your journey? And I find it kind of interesting that, in your story, your journey has shifted away from your goals and at many points. Is there anything more that you'd like to expand on about that kind of idea?
So I think about this a lot because I don't like what I do. I don't like being an advocate. I don't like to be an activist. I don't like to fight people. I don't want to be a therapist. I don't want to do all the things that I do, but I do them because I I know the different holes that exist and am trying to find ways to create accessible ways to get around them. So my dreams and my hopes for myself were taken. I had hoped to maybe be an architect or an artist or a lawyer. I don't know if I would have followed through with being a lawyer, but all of my creative side that makes me feel so alive, I don't have access to. I don't get to do it because the sole focus is constantly working towards creating these safer spaces and more accessible spaces for our community. So I feel like my identity has become my life and taken me down all the paths that I've gone down because of the world that I want to leave behind, but not because what I actually am passionate about outside of other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially, you've kind of led into the next question beautifully. Um, you talk about the things that you've sort of been forced into because of your transition. Is there anything that you feel proud or maybe empowered that you've been able to accomplish because of your transition?
There's a lot of changes that I've been able to create, which I'm excited of the impact that it's had. So first off, uh, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, I was fighting hundreds of therapists a day about writing letters for clients after only one session because they want clients to come multiple sessions or a year. And I got tired. I got tired of fighting them. So I decided to make a list. And I made a list of providers in California who will write these letters after one session. I then started to expand that and started to reach out to every single state. Um, I had so much pushback of people saying it's out of my scope of practice or competence. So it's not out of their scope of practice as a therapist. It's out of their scope of competence, meaning that they don't have the skills to do it. So what I did was I last minute threw together a workshop, did a training that I recorded that I now have available to any therapist. So when they say it's out of my scope of competence, I say, great, take my training. It has the informed consent, it has a recorded training, and it has the letter that all you have to do is change the information for you and your client. So then they said, well, I can't afford that. Okay, you don't have to. I will make it free for you. So there's essentially three prices to it. It's either $100, it's pay what you can, or can't pay anything, agree to give at least one free letter to a trans or non-binary person. So this way, somebody in our community is going to benefit from us. That
Beautiful.
list now has at least one, if not up to like 90 providers in every single state. So some states I could only find like one or two. California, I think we have like 90 or something like that in there. And the rule with this is that they have to provide a letter after one session for hormones, for surgery, for anything. Because what therapists don't realize is that we're only supposed to assess somebody's if somebody is sane enough to make decisions for themselves. That's it. And what therapists have been doing is assessing if somebody is trans enough. It's like, how are you as a cis person to assess if somebody is trans? Even as a trans person or a non-binary person, I can't assess your transness or non-binariness because your identity is unique to you. Your journey is unique to you. I can't base it off of what I've been through. That's incredibly harmful and toxic. So I don't like the word proud, but I feel very excited that this might be helping people. I know for myself, I've written over 100 letters. Um, and just hearing that shift from when they call in panicking, it's like a lot of the times people are saying what I think they want me to hear versus like I assure them this letter is going to be written, like let's just meet, like, and then from the moment that we're hanging up and the excitement, and oftentimes I've gotten letters, emails, social media stuff like they approved the letter, I'm getting the surgery, blah 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 date. And so that's really exciting to know that somebody gets to do what they want with their own body, because a cis person wants breast implants, wants a penis enlargement, wants butt implants, whatever they want. They just go in and they get it. There's no assessment if the person is of sane of mind, if they really are needing to have that. So we deserve the same rights with our own bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have that link. I can also share that in the chat box too, if you would like.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll pass it on to everybody as well.
So what I do suggest is open it with a Google document, and what will happen is at the bottom you'll see tabs. The first one is the About tab. So either A, if therapists want the training, or B, if you come across a therapist on that list that isn't obliging by this, let me know, because that's not tolerated. I've never had anybody reach out to let me know that. But then all the other ones, you click the state you're in. I don't list the cities because we can do virtual teletherapy. So you can be hundreds of miles away. As long as you're in the same state,
Mhm.
you can get the letter from the person.
Well, that is amazing work. That is so beautiful that you've been able to put that together and offer that. It's very disheartening to hear that there are like 90 of those therapists in California and as few as one or two in some states. I really feel for our brothers and sisters and non-binary um, siblings that are out there that are that have that few of resources. It's really
And
disheartening.
and honestly, like again, it came out of exhaustion of fighting. Like
Yeah.
there's this organization called the Gallup Pledge, GALAP. And I've written them multiple times saying, I've had a lot of clients come to me after finding a therapist on there, because I'm also on there, and that therapist wanted them to go to multiple sessions, wanted them to out themselves to their family, like wanted to do things that were really harmful in order to get a letter. And they didn't want to make any type of changes to kind of vet the mental health therapist more, or to like make it so it's only one session. And so I like oftentimes people always say, "Oh, have you heard of the Gallup?" And it's like traumatizing to me. Not trauma. It's like incredibly painful to hear, because it's like, yeah, I do know, and I fought and I fought and I fought, and I've like tried to collaborate, and it went nowhere. And that's why I've created this list. It sounds very similar because it is, but the differentiation is one session. That's it. No more than one session. The Gallup does not ask therapists to do it in one session.
Mhm.
Even WPATH, I believe, wants you to have more than one session, and that's like the world that dictates how trans people should be treated at a global level.
Mhm. So, do you have a favorite thing that you've learned throughout your journey?
That I only know what I know, I don't know what I don't know, and I will always work hard to have the willingness to learn, to do, and be better. I will always hold privileges in many different ways that will prevent me from being aware of the harm that I'm causing. And I hope that I can continue to cultivate tools to be able to address these harms so that I can do and be better for people in our community and outside of our community.
You have such a wonderful perspective in reaction to the perspective that you've had to fight with your whole life. It's really beautiful to hear. As we wrap up this section, head into our break and then into your audience questions, comments, and anything else, and talking more about Van's experience with, as being a therapist and in putting together the documentary, the book, and now the conference. So the last question that I have in this section, what advice do you have for young or closeted trans folks out there?
That's such a big thing, because there's so many. Like, trust
Right.
yourself, trust that you know who you are, and if it's not safe to be who you are, it doesn't mean that you're not who you are. You need to do what you need to do to survive and to get to spaces that are safe enough for you, and that's not always available, right? That means access to transportation, to money, all the different things, and a lot of people don't have that. And so I think it's really important that if you can, to try to find different ways to exist in spaces that are affirming, whether it's virtually, whether it's a fantasy place in your head, whether it's a journal or a book or a movie, but finding something that can feel affirming to you, and not and finding different ways to combat those people in your life. And I don't mean verbally, because that could put a lot of people in dangerous situations, but even if you're just having that fight that you wish that you could have in your head, um, because at the end of the day, if we're not alive, then nothing else matters.
Well, I appreciate that sentiment there, the idea of giving yourself the space. If you're not able to have it in physical space or with the people that you're currently around, the situation you're in, taking that mental time to give yourself the space and to have trust in your identity, even though you're not able to fully express it. I think that's again a very beautiful sentiment. In closing here, Van Ethan Levy, thank you so much for coming on, sharing so much of your story, being so candid, for sharing the different viewpoints, and for providing so much for the community. We really appreciate it.
And Sushi, the dog.
Oh, and Sushi.
Yeah, thank you. I so appreciate it.